There is a precise reason why you stopped here today, and it has absolutely nothing to do with chance or with the invisible decisions of a cold algorithm dictating what appears on your screen. Something much deeper within you, something your rational mind has not yet fully grasped, recognized a signal. It perceived a familiar vibration that compelled your attention before you could even think about it. This message was never meant to dissolve into the noise, nor was it designed for those who wander aimlessly in search of momentary distraction to escape their reality. What you are encountering now has a deeper intention, almost surgical in its precision. Why does it seem to track and reach only those who are standing at a very specific edge of their existence, right at that invisible line, just before everything in their life changes irreversibly? I am speaking of that exact moment, the one that arrives just before all the silent patience and all the exhausting work no one ever saw finally begin to make sense. Carl Jung would say that what you are experiencing is not random, but the manifestation of an inner process that has been unfolding beneath the surface of your awareness. The psyche does not move in straight lines. It speaks through symbols, through tension, through the quiet insistence of something that refuses to be ignored. And you are in the middle of that process. I know you are exhausted. I know it feels like you are walking blindly through a completely dark room, with the absolute certainty that the light switch is right there, brushing against your fingertips. And yet, for reasons that seem beyond your control, the light does not turn on. You have been carrying this strange and heavy sensation for weeks, perhaps even months. It is a silent pressure that consumes you from within, a suffocating mixture of a hope that refuses to die and a mental fatigue that whispers that perhaps you have imagined everything. You begin to look around and notice how the world continues its normal course, how others seem to move forward effortlessly within a system that rewards speed and superficiality. And then that cold voice in your mind, the doubt that has slowly become your greatest adversary, begins to whisper that maybe you chose the wrong path. You question deeply whether all the sacrifices, the pain, the isolation, and the solitary effort were nothing more than an illusion, a comforting story you told yourself to endure the weight of a reality that refuses to move. But this is where Jung's insight becomes crucial. He taught that the greatest transformations of the soul are never visible at the surface. What appears as stagnation is often the psyche reorganizing itself at a profound level. Society conditions you to believe that if results are not immediate and tangible, then you are failing. And that external pressure merges with your internal conflict, making you feel as if you are losing your mind for holding on to a vision that no one else can see or understand. Yet what you are feeling in your chest, that undeniable sense of proximity, is not a delusion. With every breath, you sense that something immense is about to break open, to unlock, to release all that energy that has been contained for so long. But when you look at your hands, at your environment, material reality confronts you with the raw sensation that nothing has changed, that you are still trapped in the same starting point. This is the cruelest illusion your mind can create. You have interpreted the overwhelming doubt and the dense darkness as definitive signs that you have lost your way, as proof that your journey is ending in failure. But what no one has told you, what remains hidden behind this barrier of mental agony, is that this very despair, this internal chaos that feels like it could destroy you, is the clearest evidence that something has already shifted. Jung described this as the confrontation with the shadow, the moment when everything that was unconscious begins to rise, not to punish you, but to transform you. The psyche intensifies its pressure precisely when it is closest to a breakthrough. The darkness you feel is not the absence of light, but the incubation of it. In a moment, you will understand why all this silent pain is not a punishment, and why what you call stagnation is actually the threshold of an explosion that will redefine your reality. Reaching this point has already separated you from the majority. Most people cannot tackle the weight and silence of waiting. They retreat. They run back to the safety of a predictable and mediocre life. But you stayed, and that changes everything. That is why I want you to leave a mark, something visible, something undeniable, and make a radical decision that almost no one dares to make. Write in the comments, "I accept my new life." But do not let it be an empty gesture, not a mechanical act driven by habit. Let it become a symbolic commitment, a conscious declaration that your resistance has come to an end, and that you are no longer clinging to the illusion of control. In the language of Carl Jung, this is the moment when the ego begins to loosen its grip, allowing the deeper self to emerge and reorganize your inner world. It is the threshold where your old identity no longer dictates your path, and something far more authentic begins to take form within you. Now, let us continue. The kind of inner explosion I am speaking about does not arrive with warnings, nor does it descend from the sky wrapped in spectacle for others to applaud. Real transformation, as Jung understood, is rarely theatrical. It is silent, unsettling, and often invisible to the external world. The most profound shifts in human existence are forged in the depths of the unconscious, far beneath the surface, where no one else can observe, measure, or validate what is happening within you. In those hidden corridors of your psyche, in the shadowy regions Jung described as the unconscious, you have been planting seeds for a long time. You have made difficult choices in solitude, decisions that went unnoticed and uncelebrated, not because they lacked value, but because those around you did not possess the awareness to perceive the direction in which those invisible steps were leading you. You have been engaging in a quiet dialogue with your own shadow, confronting parts of yourself that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. And during this immeasurable stretch of time, you have carried a heavy burden, the constant questioning. You have wondered whether every sacrifice mattered, whether choosing the more difficult and meaningful path over the easy and empty one was worth it. There were moments when you questioned if you were building something real or simply wasting your youth in a struggle no one could see. But the truth, raw and uncompromising, is this: every single one of those invisible acts mattered. None of them disappeared into nothingness. According to Jungian understanding, each conscious choice to face difficulty rather than avoid it contributes to the process of individuation, the gradual integration of the psyche into a unified whole. All that effort has been accumulating beneath the surface, building an immense psychological pressure. It is not random, nor is it lost. It is gathering, organizing, and preparing for a decisive rupture. What feels like stagnation is, in reality, compression. And compression inevitably leads to transformation. Up until now, you have been told repeatedly to be patient, to trust a process you could not fully see, to keep pushing forward even when everything in you questioned the logic of continuing. And you did. You showed a level of patience that, at times, seemed almost irrational. You endured when surrender would have been easier. But what you are experiencing now is no longer mere hope. What flows through you at this moment is something far deeper, a visceral knowing. It is not an idea or a comforting belief. It is a physical certainty that moves through your body, something almost cellular, warning you that something fundamental has shifted. The atmosphere of your life feels different, heavier, charged with meaning. This is not a fantasy created by exhaustion. It is the psyche reaching a threshold, the unconscious breaking into awareness. Jung would describe this as the moment when the contents of the unconscious begin to surface with undeniable force. All those isolated actions that once seemed disconnected are now converging toward a critical point. They are no longer separate efforts. They are forming a pattern, a structure, a destiny that is beginning to reveal itself. Look at the laws that govern transformation in the natural world. Consider how water behaves under heat. It can rise from 0 to 99 degrees, absorbing energy continuously, yet showing no visible change on the surface. To the casual observer, nothing appears to be happening. The surface remains still, calm, almost deceptive. You could watch it for hours and believe that your effort is meaningless. But in the precise instant it reaches 100 degrees, everything changes. The transformation is not gradual, nor negotiable. The entire structure shifts violently and irreversibly. What was once still becomes movement. What was once silent becomes force. This is where you are now. You are standing at that exact threshold, 1 degree away from a complete transformation that will permanently alter the rules of your existence. The work you have done in silence, in darkness, within the hidden layers of your psyche, has altered your internal structure so profoundly that your external reality can no longer sustain the old version of you. It is beginning to reorganize itself, aligning in subtle ways to reflect what you have become internally. However, crossing that final degree comes with a cost, one that very few are willing to face. It requires a deep psychological rupture, and this explains why the last days may have felt like an emotional storm, almost unbearable in intensity. This is not a mistake. It is not a deviation from your path. From a Jungian perspective, this is the confrontation with the final layers of the shadow, the dissolution of the identity that once protected you but can no longer contain who you are becoming. The pain you feel is the tearing away of an outdated psychological skin. It is the ego resisting its own transformation, struggling to maintain control over something that is already beyond its command. This final agony is not there to break you. It is there to strip away everything that is no longer aligned with your true nature. It is the necessary tension that precedes rebirth. And as Jung taught, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. You are not at the beginning of your journey. You are at the edge of emergence. And what comes next is not something you will chase. It is something that will unfold from within you, because you have finally become capable of receiving it. This feeling that something inside you is breaking apart is not an accident. It carries intention, a precise psychological necessity. Carl Jung would say that what you are experiencing is the tension of transformation, the unavoidable friction between who you have been and who you are becoming. Darkness always deepens just before the emergence of light, not because existence is cruel, but because the psyche must descend before it can rise. This is not punishment. It is initiation. You are being pushed to the edge so that the outdated structure of your identity can finally collapse, so that the former version of yourself, too fragile, too conditioned, too dependent, can dissolve under the weight of a reality it was never designed to sustain. There is a harsh truth about the human mind that few are willing to face. The person you were just months ago, shaped by fear, attachment, and the constant need for validation, would not have survived what is now unfolding within you. That earlier self was not equipped to carry this level of awareness. And so, life, or rather, the deeper intelligence of your psyche, created the necessary conditions for your evolution. The isolation, the silence, the sensation that others turned away from you, none of it was accidental. From a Jungian perspective, that solitude was your descent into the unconscious. It was the space where illusions are burned away, where the persona, the mask you showed, the world begins to crack, forcing you to confront the shadow you spent years avoiding. In that silence, without distraction, you were left face to face with your fears, your contradictions, your hidden impulses. And in doing so, you began to cultivate a kind of inner strength that cannot be learned in comfort, a strength that only emerges when all external support is stripped away. Learning to ignore the voices that doubt you is not a skill acquired in ease. It is forged through pain. Every door that closed abruptly, every failure that seemed to suffocate you, every moment where you considered abandoning everything, these were not meaningless guttons. They were psychological confrontations. Each one forced you deeper into yourself, stripping away illusions of control and exposing the raw core of your being. And yet, despite everything, something within you refused to surrender. A primitive, almost instinctual force kept pushing you forward, even when clarity was nowhere to be found. Jung described this as the self, the organizing center of the psyche, guiding you toward wholeness, even when the conscious mind resists. Now, looking back, you can begin to see that none of those falls were wasted. Every rejection, every abandonment, was a necessary redirection, pulling you away from environments and patterns that would have drained your energy and kept you psychologically stagnant. What was being forged within you was not comfort, but character, not ease, but structure. Because the greatest transformations in life are not about obtaining what you desire in a single moment. The real challenge, the one that breaks most people, is developing the psychological capacity to hold that new reality without collapsing under its weight. Power, success, clarity, none of these are sustainable without an inner foundation strong enough to contain them. You have undergone a deeply painful transformation. Whether you fully realize it or not, you have been engaged in the process. Jung called individuation the integration of all aspects of the self into a unified whole, and this process demands isolation, confrontation, and the gradual dismantling of false identities. You have been forced to turn inward, to focus on reconstruction at the deepest level. And now, that silent phase of preparation is reaching its conclusion. You are approaching a threshold, a psychological doorway. Beyond it lies a different mode of existence, one where the constant struggle begins to dissolve, and where the results of your inner work start to manifest externally. This is not a distant fantasy or a comforting illusion. This shift is happening now. It is already unfolding within you, long before the external world reflects it. You will recognize it not through dramatic external changes at first, but through an internal shift, a subtle yet powerful sense of relief, a grounded calm that replaces the anxiety of waiting. Even if your external circumstances appear unchanged, something fundamental within you has already crossed a point of no return. And according to Jungian thought, once the psyche reorganizes itself at that level, reality inevitably begins to rearrange in response. But at this critical stage, there is a mistake that can undo everything. It is subtle, almost invisible, because it operates automatically within your mind. After so much struggle, so much effort, so much relentless pushing, you have internalized the belief that everything depends on constant force. That if you stop, even for a moment, everything will fall apart. This belief, however, is not strength. It is fear disguised as discipline. And here is where you must listen carefully, because what is required of you now contradicts everything you have been conditioned to believe. The final step is not more effort. It is not more control. It is not another strategy, another attempt to force reality into submission. The final step is to stop, to allow, to release the obsessive need to control every detail, the how, the when, the exact form in which your transformation must appear. Because what you fail to see is that the battle you have been fighting externally has already been resolved internally. Continuing to force outcomes now only creates resistance within your own psyche. This goes against the cultural narrative that glorifies exhaustion, that equates suffering with worthiness. But Jung's teachings point in a different direction. True transformation does not arise from brute force. It emerges from alignment, from the moment when the conscious mind stops interfering with the deeper intelligence of the self. You are not being asked to do more. You are being asked to step out of your own way, to trust the process that has already reshaped you, to understand that what is coming into your life is not something you must chase, but something you have already become capable of receiving. And if you can surrender that final layer of control, if you can allow instead of forcing, you will realize that everything you thought you needed to fight for was already on its way to you. Your task at this precise moment is no longer to obsess over solving the entire puzzle, because at a deeper level, the essential pieces have already arranged themselves within the hidden architecture of your psyche. What remains is not effort in the external sense, but an inner position, an unshakable certainty that the mechanisms of transformation are already operating in your favor, beyond the threshold of conscious awareness. You must root yourself in a state that Carl Jung would describe as a conscious alliance with the unconscious, a calm expectancy, a grounded stillness, a quiet but immovable trust in the unfolding process. You are being asked to abandon, once and for all, that restless anxiety that makes you question every step, as if existence itself were fragile beneath your feet. That trembling vigilance belongs to a psyche that has not yet integrated its own depth. From a Jungian perspective, true success is not something you violently impose upon reality through sheer will. It is something that emerges when you cease resisting the deeper currents of your own being, when you allow what has been forming in the unconscious to finally take shape in the world. For a long time, you have carried an invisible burden, dense, oppressive, almost unbearable. It is the weight of uncertainty, the constant questioning of whether your moment will ever arrive. It is the tension of trying to control what was never meant to be controlled consciously. Beneath that tension lives a more primitive fear, the fear that you have missed your opportunity, that life has bypassed you, that your path was never truly yours to walk. That voice that visits you in silence, especially in the quiet hours, is not truth. It is a defense mechanism. Jung would call it a manifestation of the shadow, a protective structure built by the psyche to shield you from disappointment. It whispers limitations not because they are real, but because they feel safer than hope. It would rather confine you to familiar suffering than expose you to the vulnerability of transformation. But what if that fear is nothing more than a distortion? What if the only true barrier between you and the life that is already forming around you is your inability to accept that it is already yours? Your nervous system has been conditioned for survival for so long that it mistrusts peace. It interprets calm as danger, stability as illusion. And yet, the moment has come for a radical decision. Here, now, you must decide that the waiting has ended. Not because the external world has given you permission, but because internally the conditions have already been fulfilled. The shift required is not magical, nor is it superficial positivity. It is a decisive command directed toward the unconscious, a firm declaration that the old identity, the one rooted in waiting and doubt, no longer governs your reality. You do not need to understand how every piece will move. Consciousness does not need to map the entire terrain. What is required is that you stop negotiating with your own doubt. You have been fighting shadows, clinging to a survival posture because, paradoxically, pain felt safer than the unknown expansion of your own potential. But true power, real, integrated power, demands the abandonment of that outdated armor. When you finally cross that invisible threshold and find yourself standing inside the reality that has been forming in silence, you will remember this exact moment. You will remember the discomfort you felt, the resistance, the internal conflict between a deeper instinct that knew and the fear that tried to suppress it. That tension is not a sign of failure. It is evidence of transformation. You will understand then that this was your point of rupture, not because of any external message, but because your psyche had reached the level of development necessary to sustain what is coming. You endured the emptiness. You tolerated being misunderstood. You remained standing when every logical part of your mind suggested retreat. What is unfolding is not approaching you from a distant place. It is already active, already restructuring your environment in ways that will soon become undeniable. The unconscious is not static. It is dynamic, creative, or constantly influencing the field of your experience. So now, a psychological closure is required. If something within you recognizes the truth in these words, if a deeper, almost instinctual part of your being knows that the time of playing small has ended, then the shift must be made consciously. Not through explanation, not through justification, but through decision. This is the moment where identity changes. You are no longer the one who waits. You are the one who acts in alignment with what has already been established internally. This is what Jung described as individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, beyond fear, beyond conditioning, beyond illusion. And if you encounter someone who remains trapped in doubt, exhausted from pushing against invisible walls, understand this. The human mind can become so entangled in its own defenses that it sometimes requires an external voice to interrupt the pattern, not to save it, but to remind it of what it already knows. Everything you experienced, the chaos, the confusion, the apparent setbacks, was not meaningless. It was a necessary dismantling. The psyche had to break down what was false in order to build something real, something resilient, something capable of sustaining the weight of success without collapsing. Your victory is not accidental. It is not arbitrary. It is the natural consequence of your endurance, your confrontation with yourself, your willingness to face what others avoid. Now only one question remains. When the door opens in front of you, suddenly, undeniably, will you have the courage to step through it, or will you hesitate out of habit? Breathe. Ground yourself in this awareness. Accept the power that is already yours. From this moment forward, the waiting is over.